Florida is becoming the epicenter of this real estate price correction, and builders are freaking out. Let's dig into what is going on in Florida and how this is accelerating despite mainstream media sharing an alternate narrative. Let's dig in. So, first things off, I'm getting phone calls legitimately from builders who are trying to sell me their inventory for 25 or 30% off the whole new construction portfolio. So I'm getting these calls once per week. I spoke with another investor over this week that also said, hey, the South Florida inventory that we have, prices have fallen 28% already. We're just going to stop building new inventory. So the builders are freaking out because prices are falling so fast that it's defeating the margins that they have. These builders generally have margins between 18 and 20%. Obviously, if they built at a price point and then it came down 30%, they're underwater on that, including all the costs that they have for holding that inventory, because a lot of these builders expected to get this inventory sold a lot more quickly. So this is just the beginning of this market transition into a downturn. The magnitude and direction and the timing of it, we're not really clear on. However, we're telling you right now the direction has shifted in Florida, and Florida is moving very quickly. Just for those of you who might not know, a 10% decline from the peak is called a correction, and a 30% decline is considered a crash. So they're already talking about crashing their own new construction prices to be able to get them sold and get their cash out of the Florida market. This also is an indicator that they don't themselves have confidence in the Florida market moving forward, which is really scary. Now, this is a map of Jacksonville. If you go around Florida, there's different spots that have more inventory than others. However, they are starting to build up every single month. Just 3 years ago, we had 2,000 active listings locally. Now we have about 10,000. It was at 12,000, but we had about 20% of the market rage quit, which basically means they got upset that they couldn't get the price that they wanted after a couple months of having it listed. They took it over the holidays and take their property off the market over the holidays, and they're putting it back on the market at the beginning of the year. I can tell you this is absolutely happening because it's happening in my market right now. Even our own company has 24 active listings going live just over the last 3 days. So this is something that we're likely to continue to see this year, is a stack up of inventory. And then there's going to be a seller or two who does capitulate on their price and say, hey, I need to reduce my price to get my property sold. I really do need to move. They're going to give up their lower interest rate that they had locked in. And we're going to start seeing prices trend down this year in Northeast Florida. This is the number one chart I want you to pay attention to. This is the most important aspect of Florida's real estate market. We are very dependent upon net migration, which means basically people around the country moving to Florida, especially from high cost areas to now Florida, which was a very affordable place to live just a decade ago, but is not so much anymore. And that's part of the reason why we're seeing this migration stall. You can see basically we've had a 90% decline in migration just over the last few years. We had this massive pop, and we're going all the way back down to 2009, 2010 levels. And this is a huge problem. It's also a huge problem because if we see a crack in the stock market, because most of the people buying here are, older in nature and they're tied to the stock market performance is a lot of their income, it's going to be a massive problem for the Florida market. We still haven't even seen it crack. So we're seeing less migration, and we're seeing other asset classes still be inflated, but real estate is starting to already come down when these other asset classes are already staying up. And that's a huge problem. Another aspect I want you to pay attention to is U.S. household formation, which is starting to decline very rapidly. The affordability crisis is very real. We are now at a 9-year low of household formation, and this is on top of this silver tsunami, which is basically we have a bunch of baby boomers, sadly about 48 million, according to a Harvard study, who will pass away over the next decade. A lot of them live in states like Florida. So we're going to see an older generation pass away, and then younger generations are not creating household formation because of the affordability crisis, which could add up to a very traumatic experience for the Florida real estate market. We're already seeing it on the ground every single day. And those people who bought from 2022 up until 2025, moving forward, I think those are going to be really tough vintage years because prices are coming down pretty rapidly, and those are the ones that could be underwater for some time, and we could start seeing the distress in those vintage years. Other aspects of the Florida market that's really driving the pain is we have rising costs, we have high taxes, we have high insurance, the repair cost to fix things are high. This is a new study that came out from Realtor.com that said that Florida homeowners pay the most in HOA fees, and Miami is actually hit the hardest, and Miami prices are taking a dive. The median HOA dues rose $135 per month, up 8% year over year. It's things like this where this slow trickle really impacts the affordability, and it causes people to either leave the state or downsize into outskirt type of communities, and prices start to come down because they just can't. There's got to be a limit to how much people can afford versus the wages that people make here. And that's the big issue too. The locals are getting completely priced out because the wages just don't make sense. And of course, consumer confidence and consumer sentiment is one of the biggest aspects driving the real estate market. And it's at a 13-year low. And this makes sense. If you're a local here in Jacksonville, you're making an average household income of 68,000, but you need about 120,000 to buy the median priced home here. So we are far behind in terms of the affordability crisis. All other aspects of people's lives are getting more expensive. And it's getting worse every single month. And that's why we're starting to see this confidence fall because people just don't have the savings even for a down payment, especially the first time home buyers whose share dropped from 50% of purchases just a few decades ago all the way down to just being 20% of purchases today. And we have to ask ourselves, who is that next buyer who's going to be purchasing these houses from the baby boomers who will sadly be passing away? When you have this consumer confidence low, you have the net migration slowing down, and you can start to see the story of what is happening here locally. And all of these different variables are causing, a glut of supply and low demand at the same time. In that over a couple more months, you're going to start seeing these price declines pretty rapidly. And this is obviously causing pending home sales to be at an all-time low. This is national, but it's definitely true here in Jacksonville. Record low in contract signings to close in 2025. One of the lowest Decembers on record as inventory continues to stack. And not only are pendings down, but there's more cancellations of those pendings. High cost and inspection jitters are killing sales in Atlanta, Jacksonville, and the San Antonio lead the way. So Jacksonville, that's where I am. People aren't able to sell their current home, right? So that prevents the buy sale from happening. There's creating this kind of lock-in effect. The inspections, these properties are older. If you're close to the water, you got to keep it maintained, things like that. It's a huge problem here in Florida. You definitely have to maintain your house so they don't become dilapidated. We see a lot of them, unfortunately, go that way, which that's why there's a lot of flippers in the state of Florida, a lot of speculation. But, this is just an indicator. Look, we have pending sales down. Now we have cancellations going up, and it's starting to slow the market, and sellers are starting to get spooked, especially if their house is not in mint condition. And of course, every area is completely different. Look at what's happening in the Northeast, okay? They're actually experiencing price gains. They have low inventory. They have more restriction on what can be built. They haven't built as much. They do have their own issues, right? They have demographic issues. They have insurance issues. Their housing stock is very, very old. And so they're also going to participate in the silver tsunami. And the young people are migrating out because it's such a high cost. But they're not relocating as much to Florida at this point in time because we're now unaffordable to them as well. They're finding other states to go to. But right now, just looking at this, it looks like Florida is turning out to be ground zero for this downturn in the housing market. And look at this. This is where the most housing permits were approved in 2024. One of the things we notice in Florida is the builders just keep building. I don't know what they're seeing. I know once they break ground and it takes 2 to 3 years for them to finish the project, they do need to go ahead and finish that project. I think that's what the majority of what we're seeing. But there's a lot of approved permits. They're ready to go. They're just waiting for the demand to come back so they can start building these homes. But we're completely overbuilt from a multifamily side too. There's multifamily apartment complexes still under construction going up all around our city when we already have this migration that's really slowed to basically near zero. And that's a huge, huge concern because we need that migration for Florida to continue the growth of the state. So again, builders have to finish their projects. Look at Texas, look at California. These areas are where the permits were approved and there's lots of building, there's lots of speculation, and we're just waiting around for the demand to come back. And the way that the administration wants to do it is by lowering interest rates. I'm not convinced that the administration has that tool in their tool belt that they're going to be able to really drive down rates to where they want to see them. But this chart's really interesting as well. Florida has more housing inventory than the entire Northeast. This, of course, only goes up to March 2025, but it's one of my favorite charts from Reventure Consulting that just shows you the difference of what two markets can be. I mean, Florida's housing supply is greater than New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, like all of these states. Florida has more supply than all of them. And so it's the tale of two markets, right? They didn't build in the Northeast. They're building in Florida from the speculation, from the institutional builders, because we had this massive migration. And now the migration has slowed. That is going to be one of the biggest topics that we're going to be looking at, especially if we start seeing negative net migration to Florida. That's going to have a drastic impact on our local economy. So I'd love to hear from what you think. Will the housing market decline in the Northeast? Will it spread to the Northeast? They have their own individual problems. I know a lot of people there saying, hey, it's not here. We still have a shortage. But are you starting to see some of the issues we're talking about around affordability? And where are you located and what are you seeing on the ground? I'd love to hear from you. As always, you can follow me on X at John Brooks, or you can subscribe to my newsletter. I send out to about 27,000 people every single week, and you can get information there that I can't talk about here on YouTube. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next week.